Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to decode the absolutely fascinating evolutionary journey of the plant kingdom. We're talking about the epic ascent from simple single-celled water dwellers all the way up to towering massive trees. Have you ever looked out at a dense forest, or, even just a tiny patch of moss clinging to a damp rock, and wondered how all this green life actually managed to conquer planet Earth? Well, today, we're mapping out that exact ascent.
To really understand this journey, we first have to look at how we actually map it out. Early on, scientists like Carl Linnaeus used what's called an artificial system. This was based purely on gross morphology, basically just what a plant looked like on the outside. But there was a massive flaw with that. Think about it. If you take two genetically identical seeds and you grow one in a bone-dry desert and the other in a wet swamp, their leaves are going to look completely different. Relying just on those superficial visual traits was highly inaccurate. So science eventually shifted to the modern phylogenetic system, which looks at genetics and shared evolutionary ancestors, because at the end of the day, genetics just don't lie.
So here's our agenda for this explainer. First, we just cover the classification framework, and next we'll look at the simple to complex role. Then, we'll journey through algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, and finally wrap up with gymnosperms.
Let's move to Section 1, the simple to complex rule, which is really the golden rule of biology.
This golden rule literally drives our entire evolutionary staircase today. Nature doesn't just start out by popping a giant redwood tree into existence, right? It starts with a single cell floating in a puddle. As we go through this, you'll see how plants gradually acquire these incredible, game-changing upgrades to conquer dry land. We're starting at the absolute baseline with algae, stepping up to bryophytes, advancing to the vascular pteridophytes, climbing up to the robust gymnosperms, and finally reaching the peak of complexity with angiosperms.
That brings us to Section 2. Algae are aquatic pioneers.
These first pioneers, the algae, are incredibly basic. They completely lack true roots, stems, or leaves. But here is a truly mind-blowing fact. Despite their super simple structure, algae perform a staggering 50% of all carbon fixation on planet Earth. Literally half of all the carbon dioxide being pulled out of the atmosphere and transformed into oxygen and food is all thanks to them. They are the ultimate biological producers.
And when you break down the classes of algae, you see this really elegant evolutionary logic. We have green, brown, and red algae. Now, all plants have chlorophyll A. But notice what happens as we move from green to brown to red. The secondary pigment shifts from B to C, then to D. The way they store food changes too, from regular starch in green to mannitol in brown and fluoridinium in red. And look at their flagella, those little tails that help their spores swim. Green algae have equal flagella. Brown algae downgrade to unequal ones, and by the time we reach the deep-sea dwelling red algae, they've lost their flagella entirely.
Now, I know these botanical names can be a lot, so to lock these into your memory, let's use some quick mnemonics. For green algae, just picture a classic car SUV. That stands for Chlamydomonas, Chara, Spirogyra, Ulathrix, and Volvox. For brown algae, think self-defense, Sargassum, Ectocarpus, Laminaria, Fucus, Dictyota. And for red algae, simply think PGPG, Porphyra, Gelidium, Polysiphonia, Gracilaria. It is seriously a foolproof way to keep track of who belongs exactly where. Moving on to Section 3, Bryophytes, the amphibians of the plant kingdom.
This is where we take our very first brave step out of the water. Now, bryophytes are called the amphibians of the plant kingdom for a very specific, absolutely crucial reason. Although they technically live on solid land, their motile male gametes still require liquid water to swim. Just like a frog needs a pond to lay its eggs, a bryophyte desperately needs a damp, shady environment, or sexual reproduction simply, physically cannot happen.
Their life cycle is also wild. Unlike more advanced plants, their main leafy body is haploid, meaning it has half the chromosomes, and it makes its own food. But the diploid sporophyte is completely dependent on it for nutrition. To put that into human terms, imagine if your primary body only had half of your DNA, and the version of you with full DNA was just a tiny little parasite growing on top of you. That's exactly how bryophytes work. Their main green body, the gametophyte, does all the heavy lifting with photosynthesis. And when reproduction happens, a little stalk-like structure called a sporophyte grows directly out of it, essentially acting as a freeloader just to get its meals.
Next up is Section 4, Pteridophytes, the vascular trailblazers.
Stepping further up the ladder, pteridophytes realized that to truly conquer drier land, they needed a massive technological upgrade. We're talking true roots, true stems, and a full-blown vascular plumbing system made of xylem and phloem. Because bryophytes lacked this internal plumbing, they were forced to stay tiny and hug the ground. But pteridophytes, with their new vascular tubes, they could suddenly suck water from deep underground and pump it way up high into the air, allowing them to grow substantially taller. It was a real game changer.
This group also introduced something absolutely groundbreaking called heterospory. This is the evolutionary milestone where the plant starts producing two totally different sizes of spores: tiny male microspores and large female macrospores. Before this, plants just released uniform generic spores into the wind. But by keeping the large female spore safe inside its body to protect and nourish it, the plant laid the critical foundation for the eventual evolution of seeds. It's the exact same underlying logic.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 5, Gymnosperms, the naked seeds.
Nearing the top of our evolutionary staircase, we find the highly complex, towering gymnosperms. The name itself literally translates to naked seed, derived from gymno for naked and sperma for seed. This means their seeds are completely exposed, entirely lacking the protective ovary wall or fruit covering that we see in flowering plants. If you've ever looked closely at a pine cone, you've seen this in action. The seeds are just sitting right there, completely naked on the rigid, woody scales, open to the air.
And because they often grow in really harsh environments with poor soil, their roots have formed these brilliant symbiotic alliances to survive. For example, Pinus partners up with fungi to create a mycorrhiza, a root network that absorbs water and minerals way better than the tree ever could on its own. Meanwhile, Cycas forms coralloid roots, literally inviting nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria or blue-green algae inside its roots to pull nitrogen fertilizer right out of the air. It is just a masterclass in biological teamwork.
And their survival tricks don't stop at the roots. Up top, they've evolved incredible biological armor to survive freezing or desperately dry environments. Think about a pine needle. It's essentially just a tightly rolled up leaf, covered in a thick, waxy cuticle with sunken stomata. By drastically reducing its surface area, the plant perfectly minimizes water loss. So even in howling dry winds or blazing sun, these towering giants absolutely thrive.
Well, we've reached the end of this explainer's journey, but I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question. We've climbed from simple single-celled algae all the way up to the mighty naked-seeded gymnosperms. But today, if you look outside, the vast majority of the food we eat and the plants we see are actually angiosperms. So how did that final, most complex group use the invention of colorful flowers and tasty fruits to completely take over the planet? How did a flower become the ultimate biological cheat code? Keep that in mind the next time you take a walk and look at the nature around you. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.